This is TWiT.
We've got James in Florida who has a question that is very well suited for our maker in residence, Aaron Newcomb.
Hey guys, I have 3 Raspberry Pis that I use in my house as media centers, and what I would like to have is a case that funneled all the cords out the back of it, and was large enough that I could put a 3.5-inch hard drive and store my media on that. That way, if I go to a hotel or maybe my in-laws' house, I could take it with me and just plug it in like you'd plug in like a DVD player or something like that, and not have this mess of cables and wires going in various places. My second question is, I see a lot of Raspberry Pi competitors, like Orange Pi, Arduino makes one. I think Asus just came out with a single board device. Do you need to have a different version of the software to run on those, or do they run with the Raspberry Pi software? So can I just load the same version of Kodi onto an Orange Pi or a Banana Pi that might have different specs and be able to use it, or is there a version of Kodi made for those devices specifically? Okay, thanks. Bye.
Great questions.
These are
James.
good questions.
Oh, great questions. And well, we've got Aaron Newcomb. He's the man to ask. Well, let's answer that backwards. We'll talk about the case later on. But what about it? We've seen since the introduction of the Raspberry Pi, you've had other companies. I'm not going to say that they're copying them, but I'm saying they're trying to play on the popularity of a low-cost, very capable computer.
Yep.
What about things like the Banana Pi? What about all those other Raspberry Pi alternatives? Are they completely compatible across the board?
So I wouldn't call them completely compatible in that you can't take the package that was built for Raspberry Pi and copy it over on a USB stick and install it and expect it to work, right? But what you can do is you can run a similar distribution as Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi runs, typically now, it's Debian Jessie, right? And you can run Debian on all of these other platforms as well. I've used Orange Pi, I've used Banana Pi, I haven't used the new Asus yet, but all of them run some version of Linux, and particularly a Debian version of Linux that you can then install Kodi the same way that you would install Kodi on the Raspberry Pi. In other words, apt-get install Kodi, right? And so as long as if you're familiar with the way things work on the Raspberry Pi and you like the way they work in Linux, then you can install, and one of the versions that I would recommend is one called Armbian, right? So it's Debian for ARM. And they've done some tremendous work in supporting these other boards. And so if you're running Armbian, then you're going to be running Debian Jessie, and you can just do the same kind of software installs that you could on Raspberry Pi. It makes it really easy. So although technically it's not the exact same software, it's similar software. It's just been built to run on that particular distribution of Linux that runs on those devices. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. If not, well, you can buy my book and find out all about it later. There's more information. We'll get to that in a minute.
And of course, you know, Linux knowledge is really Linux knowledge across the platform. It's just getting the initial OS on there. You have to get the one that's right for that device, for that processor. Right. You know, are you running an ARM processor? Are you running a Qualcomm processor? Find the distro that's going to work for you. But once you're in, Linux is going to work like Linux.
Once you're in, Linux is pretty much going to work like Linux. Obviously, there's different distributions. If you're running one that's based on Red Hat, then you're going to use a different tool set. But like I said, most people, average user, they're going to be running some sort of version of Debian. So stick with that, and you should have no problems. The other thing I'll say about those devices is that some of them come with different capabilities. They're cheap enough. I would definitely recommend checking them out. I've got several of these at home. And one of the things they do really well, as opposed to Raspberry Pi, is they run Android. I've mentioned this on shows before.
Yes.
So if you want to run Android as a media center instead of Kodi, which is something that I've done at home, try downloading the Android build and run that on these things and see if you like running Android. That's my first foray into running Android as a full-blown desktop, right, on a big monitor and everything was on an Orange Pi, and it works great. So,
you know, I get the question every once in a while, well, which one is better? And it's hard to answer that because they do different things well.
Yeah.
I've got an Orange Pi, I've got a Banana Pi, I've got the Raspberry Pi. I normally default to the Raspberry Pi because that's the one I have experience with. But I know certain things like network functions work better on other devices. Yeah. So I think you're right. If you're going to start to dabble in this, get all of the devices. They're inexpensive enough where you can afford to get them all.
Yeah.
And then run the installation on each one of them and see, is this better for me? Does this work? Do I miss keyframes with a Banana Pi versus a Raspberry Pi? That's really going to tell you which one you should use for the project.
Yeah, and one caveat, just to tag on to what you just said, is that one thing you should know is that although there's a lot of these devices out there, they don't all have the same level of support as Raspberry Pi does. Yeah. So that could be, if you're a new user or you know, maybe somebody who uses the forums a lot to find out how to do this or how to do that, you're going to find a lot more support if you're using Raspberry Pi than you are these other platforms, and that might be a downfall for a lot of people because they're like, I can't find the information I'm looking for, and it's just because they don't have as broad of a user base.
Yeah. And just remember, these are all development products. That's the whole idea, that they're to tinker with. So if you're expecting to get the same kind of support that you would by going to a Genius Bar, that's not going to happen. You got to reach out to the community. These are the people who, they probably have more experience than you. I know they have way more experience than I do, and they've probably run into the issues that you're seeing, and they might have a solution for you. And most of the time, that solution is as simple as running something in the command line, and boom, everything works properly.
Yeah, definitely. We should probably get to his question about the case as well.
For me, this is simple because everything I use is 3D printed. So I was able to design something that stored not a 3.5-inch drive, but a 2.5-inch SSD. And the reason why I went that way was because I can power that directly off the USB bus.
Exactly.
Not so much with a 3.5-inch drive. So I'm thinking you're going to need something with an external power supply that powers both the 3.5-inch drive and the RaspPi.
Right. If you really are stuck on the 3.5-inch drive, it's going to be difficult. I would definitely go with the 2.5-inch. You can find those in all kinds of sizes now, so you'll have plenty of space to use. And if you don't want to design it yourself, which I would recommend because it's fun and you'll learn something, there is a case that I found out on Thingiverse. I didn't find one on Amazon or other places. I'm sure there's lots of them out there.
I built this one.
But I found one on Thingiverse that actually gives you the room to put in a 2.5-inch drive as well as a power supply and keep it, I think what he's going for, which is, you know, this box that you just plug into the TV and plug into the wall, and it works. And I think this build could be something that you might want to take a look at. Also, if you don't have a 3D printer at home, just a reminder, there are great companies out there that will print this for you.
Shapeways.
Shapeways is one, 3D Hubs is another, or if you're...
Find a makerspace.
You knew
nearby.
where I was going. Yeah, if you can find a local makerspace that has a 3D printer, I'm sure there'd be someone there that would help you print it for either for free or, you know, maybe you buy them a beer or something like that.
You know, Aaron, I heard that there's this makerspace in Benicia. That's
right.
It's fantastic.
It is. It's fantastic. Yeah.
I wish I knew the people who ran that.
I know a little bit about that. Yeah, so we run our own makerspace, and we actually do this quite often for people. They'll come in for an open house, not really interested in being a member, but then they'll come back later and they'll say, oh, I kind of have this thing that I'd love to print. I don't really know how to do it. Can someone here just do it for me? And it's like, yeah, sure, no problem. I mean, we're all about learning. So hopefully as part of that process, maybe they learn something about 3D printing and maybe they'll get inspired to make something else. So.
I did a little session here late at night with drones. I showed a group of people how to.
You did. That was awesome.
What goes into them and how they fly. Most of them flew into the trees. But
yeah, we did. We finally got that one down, by the way. It was up there for a while, but. Yeah.
You know, we had one that was trapped in a tree for 2 years.
2 years?
Brian flew it up into a redwood.
Wow.
And his brother, who is now a park ranger, found it. It had fallen down after 2 years.
My word.
It still works, so they're pretty much bulletproof.
That's awesome.
And the battery had to be replaced, obviously.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I will say this, and you mentioned it, really seriously consider not going with the 3.5-inch drive. Go with a 2.5-inch. It will reduce your footprint by at least 40%. And then it means that you don't have to have that huge power adapter inside of it. You can run it off of a 5-volt that will power everything.
Yep.
So yeah.
Just check your amperage, make sure you've got enough. Raspberry Pi is going to cost you at least 2 amps. They recommend 2.5 amps. So then just check the amperage requirements on the 2.5-inch drive and add those two things up, as well as any other peripherals you might be using, and you'll get what kind of power supply in terms of the amperage rating that you'll need to also put in that case.
James, I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, what you're going to want to do is watch our show Know How, because you can actually ask Brian and I, and maybe we'll design one for you.
They'll do it.
Yeah, we'll do it.
They'll show you.
It's kind of what we do.